Hi, welcome back to Caring Discourse, to the poster session of the Caring Discourse conference. So let me start by saying that one of the main reasons why I decided not to cancel the conference this year and to bring it online was because of the interest expressed by the students and junior researchers who, with much grit and dedication, submitted their research for poster presentations. Today I'm here with Carmen Caeiro, Sara Sobral Diaz, Menichetti, Carla Pereira, Ines Salgueiro, and Mario Santos, and we are all waiting for Ester Leotte. I hope that she will solve her technical problem soon. So even if you cannot see them on the screen, they are here with us in the backstage. So welcome to Caring Discourse. We have 45 minutes to discuss your poster, so I'd like to start immediately with the discussion and with the questions. So let me just quickly remind you how you can interact with us. You can ask your question using the chat, or also you can join us using your video. Just write a message to caringdiscourse@gmail.com. So I see that also Ester joined us. Welcome also to you, Ester. I know that you cannot see yourself on the screen, but everything is fine. This is how this should work. So I would give the word to Sara Bigi. Hi, Sara. Welcome again.
Hi.
Thanks, yes, for your participation, very active participation. I know that you have questions. This is why you are here. So for whom?
So I have a little question for actually all of the presenters. So should I just shoot and then they reply when they come on the stage, or
I think let's start with the four of them, so we can be on the screen and they can interact with you. I think that is better. So
I guess one is shared, since I guess the project Carmen and Carmen's and Carla's project was the
Hi,
same.
Welcome.
Hi. And my question to you was if in both sides of the study you were considering, had sort of planned to also assess the persistence of the skills that the students are learning. So after the training session, if the study foresees some sort of assessment, let's say, of how much they are actually remembering after a little while, and this is a second, even smaller question actually, because it's something a bit more complicated, and I realize that. But if you have only by this study have already noticed what could be the challenges of implementing this kind of training, or having then the students actually actively use the skills that they are learning. I'm thinking about the basic challenge is time, of course. So if the skills you're learning take a bit more time, but if you see other barriers that might depend on how the system is structured, or anything else. So you said 3 or 4. So then,
just the reply, and then I will call the others. So this is, I think, also a nice.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so they have their time to answer. So, please.
You want me to start, Carmen?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine.
Okay, thank you for your questions. This project, it occurs in a timeline. So we started with this preparing and training students with these skills in the second year, and then in the year after they continue exploring more advanced communication skills. So we have this follow-up and assessment of the integration of communication skills during this timeline. But I think we also have a very important input and feedback when they go to clinical education. So when they have the real contact with the patients, and the feedback that we also receive from clinical educators. Since a few years ago, we started to contact also the clinical educators, and we have been receiving very good feedback. We would like to do a project and a study with these outcomes and explore in more detail what are the perspectives of clinical educators on the preparation of students with these communication skills. I think is one of our aims in the future. Related with research in this field. But we also think that one of the challenges that we also have is with the background of these clinical educators. So we train students in the school, and we think that we should work better and make some links between what we work with them and what they see in the clinical placements, how they work also with the clinical educators. So doing these training skills just only with students can be challenging, because if their clinical educators don't have the same principles or don't value the same principles and skills, communication skills, we can have a huge challenge. So I don't know, Carla, if you want to add more thoughts?
I think that one of the most important parts of this follow-up is the feedback from clinical placements. And I think this is quite a positive feedback that we have been receiving for the last few years, since we have started working in more detail these communication skills. I think that's very important. The other thing, I think it's important to move the study to clinical placements too, because, well, the feedback, it's important, and we have a good feedback, but I think that's not enough. We should do something more. I think it would be very useful to explore these and study these interactions between our students and real patients in clinical placements. It's difficult to do that because the period of clinical education is quite demanding for our students. They have lots of activities, and this would be an extra activity. But I think it would be important, and we could assess specific issues about communication, and it would be very useful for us to improve our approach in lectures in our
absolutely
education sessions. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
you also asked about the barriers in
Oh yeah.
presentation, and I think that I'm not sure if it's a barrier, but we have a very biomedical strong tradition in our profession, and because of that, there are some topics that are more valued by students and by clinicians, such as anatomy, biomechanics. These more objective contents, usually they are more valued by our students. So communication sometimes is something that it's just a nice extra for them. When we start our these curricular units, most of the times this is their initial feedback. But I think that throughout the process and throughout the process and while they are developing their competences, I think they become more aware of the importance of these competences. So it's a barrier, but I think we can overcome these.
Thank you. Thank you. You're muted.
Sorry, Carla and Carmen. I was just thanking you. And Sara, could you just choose two other names, and then because we have also Vito, myself, and I don't know also if Srikant have a question because I can see him here. So you just, if you have questions, Srikant, just tell me like something like that, and I will let you in.
So I think.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Sara, who?
So I guess I would like to ask a question for Julia and Ester.
Ester, okay.
Hi. So Julia, I think I would like to know a little bit more about the larger project. You said the study that you presented in the poster is set within a larger project, and then I have a comment. When I read the result that you only found four studies, you said, right? Yeah. And my thought was, wow, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about evidence? Yeah. We often talk about evidence regarding communication in healthcare. So perhaps sometimes we should be careful with the words we use, or conduct more studies like the one you presented. And for Ester, I would just, yours was a project at the very beginning that you presented. So I was going to ask what is the expected impact of the research?
Julia,
shall I start?
please? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sara, for these questions. So about the larger project, yes, as I said, this review as a very first step of a bigger project where the goal is actually to extract ways of providing information, and especially information about treatments that doctors use in the consultation. So the review is actually the entry point also, and also helps giving an understanding about what's the evidence, as you say, the tested ways of providing information for doctors. But then the next steps will be to observe which natural, spontaneous ways doctors are using for providing information, and how, and so also how they use these behaviors, these strategies. It's also difficult to find the specific label inside the interaction with the patient. So the next step is actually an observational study about an old set of videos focused on shared decision-making consultations. And then the last one is a new collection of data where we will have also data about the views of doctors about how they perceive using some strategies, and also patient recall and the understanding of the information. So to, understand a little bit more what's going on there. And about yes, it was striking also for me, of course, seeing only 4 studies. These are actually, so there is much more literature that can give insights about ways of providing the same content, for example, of information. But these are studies that have at least a control arm. Yeah. So that restricted a lot the amount of literature.
Thank you.
But it's a little bit worrying.
Yes. No, it's interesting in view of implementation, because then there's a big group of researchers and scientists who are trying to actually implement these, not only through training, mostly through training, but and implement this kind of evidence. But then if there is, like you say, there's lots of insights, but then, when you talk to non-academic stakeholders, they ask you for numbers, and then it gets difficult.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks.
Ester?
Hi. Thank you for your question. Well, what I would like to understand is to have more insights of what consumers think about teleconsultations, and the impact I expect to have is on communication professionals, so they can understand what are the benefits that consumers and users experienced and feel, what are the benefits they think about teleconsultation, so we can use that on communication, because I think that there's a lack there on communication that we are doing about teleconsultations. And with all these new contexts that we are living,
exactly,
I think that a lot of people experienced the teleconsultations, and they can have a lot of good insights to give us communication professionals, so we can communicate better the benefits of it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. In this new scenario, you probably have to add maybe some questions or sure, insights, because teleconsultations become big.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sara, and also thank you, Esther and Julia. Sara, I would suggest you just leave the studio, yes, and I'll call you back later for the other question if we have time.
Thank you.
So Srikant, here you are. So hi, welcome again.
Hi, hello.
So
haven't met for a long time.
Yeah, it's true. How are you doing? So
what happens?
Now the problem is that we don't have enough space for everyone on the screen. So you should tell me with whom you want to discuss.
Well, I could ask something to everybody, but it doesn't matter who comes on.
Okay, so I would choose the remaining one, because Sara already asked a question to 4 people, and then if we have time, you continue with the others. So I call Mario and Sara. Sara, yes. And I'm not adding Ines because her poster was in Portuguese, so I imagine that you don't have a question for her.
Not in Portuguese, no.
But if you have a question in English, I can let her.
No, that's fine. I think this is just to interact, but if I can also go back to the others, that would be fine.
Okay.
Okay, let me start with Sara first about studying the Zika virus, the public health. I think I like healthcare settings and health scare settings. So we're talking about health scare, how communication can inflame or even contribute to the scare in the way it is discussed in the public media. But what strikes me is studying a particular epidemic like the Zika virus across 3 different periods. When it happened, when it was a little bit of the past, and when it is more remote past. So in terms of studying a public health disaster, pandemic, just like COVID, it's very difficult to compare, despite the fact that you had 3 different presidents and 4 different health ministers. It still doesn't justify a study design to look across. Most people would expect, let's look at Zika virus or HIV/AIDS or the coronavirus at the same time across different settings, not across time in the same physical space. So what motivates your study design?
Wait, you are muted.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
Thank you so much for your question. Actually, my previous study was about the beginning of the epidemic. Since the whole community, science community was worried about this, especially about the microcephaly, because Zika virus has 3 different disorders in the body, but microcephaly is still the womb of the pregnant woman was the different situation. So I started to study about the language that we use to communicate without make the people fear, make the people start to fear the situation, but understand and taking care of the problem with the government, because the problem, the biggest problem is the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and the Zika virus is only one of the 3 consequences of them. So the political scenario was considered because they had different approaches, and at the beginning, my study concluded that was really effective, because they communicate not only for poor people that have lived in the area that was really in danger, but for the whole community to make aware about the situation. And then the approach was in this time frame, because during the situation, when the situation was controlled, like you said, the approach was different for the second president. And for the third, when it was controlled, but it's still the Aedes aegypti mosquito was still is there. They had to make different approaches in trying to do not scare the population, but inform the population. And they used the metaphor the whole time to make people understand better the situation.
Thank you.
Okay, I think just a final comment about, that's what I was trying to get at, the designing a study of this kind.
Mm-hmm.
Is your main research question is to compare across the 3 regimes, which is a very different research question requires different kind of, do you analyze the public health, the media and so on, as opposed to looking at living with a particular situation, therefore research interviews over a period of time, and then to see whether the political climate is an explanation, not a starting point. So the kind of information they received, the assurances, the anxieties or the fears or whatever, whether it is through metaphors or whatever, you don't start by comparing the three political spheres. You might want to come back to that as a possible explanation of whether the fear has been escalated or has gone into different proportions. And that could be because of the ways in which the different political leaderships have dealt with the situation. So this could be simply a very interesting way of where you start and what you see as a possible explanation of what you find.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying one is saying one is better than the other. It's just a way of thinking about it.
Sara, just take notes if you want to add something. Perhaps you will have the opportunity to do that later, so we can give also space to the others. And so, Srikant, do you have also a question for Mario Santos that is here? So he is ready to.
Yeah, I think it's a very similar type of question, is how we come to, because you are starting a PhD and at the early stages, I'm always intrigued by how we come to the research, the questions, the data, the topics. So do you decide on metaphors before you find one? Or do you look at the data and metaphors kind of crop up? They come up to the surface as the most important thing going on. There is always the risk in doing any kind of health communication research that we should ask ourselves, what do we eliminate? What do we exclude by focusing on something? So what would be a motivation to study metaphors in the ART consultations from whichever framework? What have you missed out? What is going on outside of the metaphors?
Yes, thank you for your question. Actually, we did not have a point of departure that metaphors will be an important thing to look at. So this was really something that that popped up during our study. We were mainly looking at people's experiences and different people's experiences, users and professionals. And from our field work as well, the way that people address, the way that people use words to describe the embryos, illustrate meanings that we want to explore, and this was the thing. So we were looking at the meanings of the embryos, but not exactly at specific metaphors. We know from the literature that there are some metaphors already that were explored in the field of ART, and that was an interesting framework, a point of departure, of course. We did not ignore that, but we were not trying to fit our results in a specific framework of metaphors, so to say. In this sense, we have been trying to be aware of this need to be opened, to keep our results open enough to be as broad as possible and to leave as little as possible out of the scope of our study. In fact, we are feeling that part of that is also a risk because. Of course, we do not want to ignore the other studies and the other things that were the other results that other authors came to regarding ART and metaphors. But what we find is that from the literature, we find a lot of things about embryos cryopreserved. The embryos that are surplus, they are not used anymore, or at least they are preserved in the cold so they can be used later. And there are plenty of studies about that. What do couples feel? What do families feel when they come to a place in ART procedures where they realize they will have part of their embryos preserved like that? So what are the meanings of those embryos? But our study is a bit different, and also originates different discourses, because we are looking at the embryos, at all of the embryos. So even the embryos that are the first embryos of that family, of that couple, even the embryos that were not felt to be surplus, so they were not spare embryos. So even those embryos, we are finding that it's not as linear as people usually address them. So there's plenty of complexity in the way that people talk about these embryos, even if all of them are part of the family project, because that would be one of the issues with the surplus embryos. Even if the embryos are all part of the family project, there are different conceptions and different ways of talking about these embryos. And this is one of the things that has been interesting for us.
So, thank you, Mario and Sara. Mario, stay with us because there is another question for you. Srikant, I put you in the backstage and I'll call you later for other question if we have time. So, I call also Ines because there is a question for you both, and I would suggest Ines to start with that. So the question is by Vito Evola. Did you find any Portuguese specific metaphors, and could you talk about the cognitive and communicative efficacy of these specific metaphors, or any alternative metaphors to suggest?
I hope I tell you all, Vito, to answer your question, no, I didn't find any specific metaphors in these campaigns, but I made a discovery that I think it's important, that it is breast cancer campaigns look at the breast cancer as a female. Breast cancer is female. All the campaigns are in pink, and I think that is a problem because breast cancer is not a problem of women, it's a problem of men and women, and I think this frames breast cancer in a way that can harm men in general. I think that is a problem. And metaphors, the majority of metaphors that are used are about fight, war, journey, the usual metaphors used.
Thank you, Ines. I don't know if Mario, you have something to add.
Yes, from our study, we are still collecting data, so we are still in a mid-range with our results. It's too early for us to talk about specific metaphors of the Portuguese context. We don't have yet enough analysis of our results, so in a way that we could say that yes, in Portugal this is this kind of scenario that we find. What we do have is that we understand that people, at least the people that we talked about, because this is a qualitative study, so it's not our intention to broaden and to generalize this, but from the people we talked with, we have been seeing that we have been seeing a kind of complexity that sometimes is even difficult to grasp. So because this is something that is not part of the mainstream communication, people usually don't talk about their embryos and their personal project of ART. What we find is that each new interview, we find a different set of discourse, of metaphors, of describing different strategies for describing the embryos, and depends of the kind of experience that person has, of course. But because people usually, they don't talk about this with friends, they don't see anything there's no public campaign anywhere. It's more rare to find a kind of a how to say, a common line of discourse among these people. So what we are trying to do is to trying to disentangle this complexity and to find the lines of discourse that exist between these people, because there are some things that, of course, are similar. But what we have now is some kind of drafts of metaphors, but we don't have yet mature results so we could answer to this question. I'm sorry.
So thank you, Mario and Ines. Now I'll call Margarita. Hi again. So
hello.
You have question for?
Carmen.
Yes.
Carmen, Caeiro, and Ester.
Okay.
Okay.
Please.
Yes, good morning. Congratulations to all of you. You have really nice studies going on. Some are a little bit more advanced than others, but I really have to congratulate you for the main research ideas and the way that you are putting your studies on the field. So I will start with Ester. My question, and it's more to ask you for your comments on, I think it's really very important and very timely, your study, for sure. And I would like to ask you if you think about adding to your study patients' perspectives of how this new way of consulting is shaping communication. Maybe you could also research how patients' perspective, the doctor's ability to communicate with them in this new, with this new universe of tools, online, telephone consultations, because we know that particularly in delivering bad news, for instance, that have to be delivered by this type of consultations, we need patients' feedback of how doctors were able to conduct a useful and humanized information delivery. And for Carmen, I was really pleased to see you using VR codes as an educational tool, because we were really starting to use it in that direction in the last 2 years. And I would like also to find out more about your experience, how students use it. If sorry, it's not exactly that my question. How did you find it in a practical way? If it was easy to use or not, to code the consultations and the interactions between the students and the simulated patient. And I also would like to congratulate you for the results, because we know that it's difficult for students to learn how to open space for dealing and asking for emotions and for emotional content, particularly when they are starting. So I want your comments about these two topics. Thank you. Thank you both.
So Ester and Carmen, try to stay like in 2 minutes each, so I can give the word again to Sarangi for at least 2 other persons, and then we have to close, unfortunately. But I think it's important that you at least listen to the questions. So please, Ester, go on.
Thank you, and it's a really important comment here, because we really want to understand how patients would like to hear the communication from doctors, and your question is really interesting for me to put in my questionnaires and in my interviews. It's really, really nice, and I will do it. But because I think that teleconsultations will be used more for follow-up consultations or for routine consultations, not for bad news. That I think that bad news we will have always the presential consultation. But even so, I really think that it's really important to understand better how patients would like to receive the communication from doctors. Yes, that was a really good suggestion.
Thank you, Ester.
Thank you for your questions and comments. Very important for us to reflect on our experience of implementing these curricular units focused on the development of communication skills. About our experience, we have been implementing these curricular units for several years, but the work with VR codes is quite recent. This is the third year that we are using it. No, sorry, the second year that we are using it. And the first time we used the instrument, it was something very informative for us, because we are aware of the communication skills, we talk about them, but sometimes this is a very subjective experience, and we cannot provide a specific feedback to students. Like here you said something that reduced space for patients to talk about their experience, and it's not the aim. So our first thoughts were, this is very informative for us, so we can give feedback, specific feedback to our students. So it's quite interesting in our first experience. And it was regarding the question about if it's easy to use or not. Well, in the first experience, the lecturers the researchers used the instrument, not the students. So we record the students' interactions with the professional actor, and we codified these interactions. And this is actually what is presented in our poster. But this year, last week actually, we were implementing the same curricular unit and the same work with the professional actor. And this year we taught students about how to use the VR codes. And for the first time, our students from the physiotherapy and the graduate course used the VR codes themselves to codify the interactions between their colleagues and the professional actor. And it was also very informative for them. I think, well, it's difficult in the beginning to include the codes and to remember the codes and to use the VR codes. But as they start doing it and they start becoming familiar with the codes, and they are trying and testing the VR codes, they become more capable, and I think they perceive they also perceive the instrument as something that it's useful, and they can provide feedback to each other with the instrument. And we had this experience last week with the students from this third year, and it was also a very good experience too.
Okay.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Ester, and thank you, Margarita.
Thank you.
So, again, Srikant, I choose for you the other person just to have at least two questions for each, if you agree. Do you agree? Is that a shared decision?
How much time are we? Who are coming?
So, Junia and Carla.
Okay.
And
Hello.
then we close and we start with the awards ceremony, because it's we don't have to interrupt. We can continue, and yeah.
Okay.
So,
I think hello both. I'll just ask a couple of things. Let me begin with Julia about the systematic review as a kind of a research tool or mechanism to advance our knowledge of what's going on or what's there to be studied. So the question is, when one embarks on a systematic review of literature with whatever keywords and criteria of exclusion, inclusion, and you end up with 4. So we as researchers, do we have a threshold when it has to be abandoned? In other words, it no longer makes sense to proceed. Because if we don't do that, then it becomes a very questionable, dubious attempt for the whole the undertaking. It almost defies the whole process. So if you end up, as you started, with eliminating and then coming up with 4, do you move ahead with the 4 or do you go back and change your criteria of inclusion, exclusion to make it respectable and move forward?
Yeah, thank you, Srikant, for this question. I agree with you that probably I need to give some bits to contextualize the review, because actually the goal of the review was wider than the focus on articles on treatment, on how to frame treatment options. So the point was what have been the tested ways to frame medical information in the doctor-patient talk. And in that purpose, we ended up with 32 articles. But of course, the content of the information is very important to understand which type of strategies researchers are testing and doctors are using. And so here comes the 4 articles that have focused on treatment option as content. So yeah, I agree with you that if the focus would have been, treatment options, probably we would have made some, go a little bit back in our steps. But looking in general at how to frame medical information and then have some insights about the content of the information to enlighten the framing strategy, sort of. I think that's that's the way we will treat and the information. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's simply, can I just ask Carla and I think Carmen I heard before.
Yeah.
And I was very struck by this idea that communication is an extra for many medical students, including psychotherapy. That is something on the side. It's not the core. The core has to be the anatomy and the biomedicine and whatever that really has to be in the curriculum and be in the forefront of the students' learning. So I appreciate this idea of looking at communication skills in second year versus third year, rather than putting them all together as in the curriculum. So that's a very good way of trying to tease out which aspects of communication might be relevant for year 1, 2, 3, and beyond. But then it raises the question of how do you place communication skills in an incremental way in the curriculum? So for instance, should cultural awareness be first managed before we talk about empathy, or the other way around? So who decides, and how comfortable does the tutor feel, apart from how expert they are in that range of communication, in cultural sensitivity, empathy, and so on? It raises more questions than it answers. How can we come up with a curriculum in psychotherapy which has an incremental view of communication, that it becomes more complex when we add elderly patients, when we add their quality of life, when we add their expectations, blah, blah, blah. But it's also an integral part of their profession, not just an extra. Those are two big challenges for both the students and the tutors, I think.
Carla, I know that it's difficult, but try to stay in 2-3 minutes maximum.
Thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very important and complex issue. We here in these posters, we didn't talk about the global, I think, structure of how we implement the communication skills in our course. We started in the first year, and we tried to give the pillars and the central keys about the communication with patients in the first year. But then for the second and the third year, we introduce more inputs according also to with their maturation, and because in the first year they are starting, and they usually students, they feel that they communicate very well with others, so they will have no problems, and gradually they become aware of the challenges that they will have in the communication. So this is a gradual process, and it's also very interligated with the clinical placements. So after each curricular year, they have a clinical placement, and in the beginning of the next year, we discuss some of the challenges and the experience they had in the relationship with their patients. So this is also very important, and we introduce this in the tutorials. We are not sure if this structure and how we start in the first year, the second and the third is the right one, but we try to manage it according to their experiences with the patients and their ability also to reflect and evaluate their performance and how they also can give feedback to their peers. It doesn't happen immediately in the beginning, so it's a gradual process.
Mm-hmm.
And complex.
Thank you.
We are not listening you. You muted.
No, I think I'm not saying anything.
Thank you.
Maria, sorry.
I was just saying thank you, Julian, thank you, Carla. So I put you in the backstage. Second, you remain with me. I just want to add before we move on with the award ceremony that Ines, you have also a question in the chat, and I would like to thank a lot Olga Bianco for all your questions. So you still, Ines, you will have the chance to answer if you want to, because it will remain in the recording of this conversation. So if you wish, you can reply. Srikant, before starting with this ceremony, I'd like to thank all of you participants to the poster session once again. I think you did a wonderful job, and I'm sure the jury had quite some difficulty to choose the winner. So I just want to show you again the selection committee, because here we have just only Srikant, but also Sara Bici, Margherita Braga, Paul Gudbrandsen, and Dussedo were participating in this selection committee. So thank you for this. Thank you very much. And And yes, so Srikant is here with me to present the winning poster. So Srikant, please, I leave you the floor. You can say something and announce the winner.
Okay, thank you for having this opportunity. And I would like to thank all the presenters. And I think it was a big range of topics and methodologies. So it wasn't easy, as you said, ranging from metaphors to telemedicine to public health to communication skills teaching, and of course, the framing of medical information. So that's quite a range. So I suspect it's not an easy thing to compare apples with oranges.
Yeah,
they were not on the same level or at the same stage of the research. But what I have been very struck with is we're not awarding an award or a winner as a poster because they have been talking and presenting.
Also, yes.
So it's a kind of multi-skilling rather than postering or talking or presenting. So we have agreed, it's a consensus, that we can only choose one winner, and the winning presentation goes to Giulia Menichetti, if I pronounce the name correctly.
Giulia Menichetti and
Menichetti. Okay,
yeah.
There you are. Congratulations. And for everybody, the title is A Systematic Review of Strategies to Frame Medical Information on Treatment Decisions in Medical Talks. So many congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So congratulations, Giulia. It would be nice if you could say a few words.
Yes, I'm very glad. It's the first time I receive a prize, and it's strange also to receive it in my home. I mean, it's very also intimate sort of, and I'm very glad because actually this work was a huge work, not only of me but of a lot of people involved. So I'm particularly glad also for all the other collaborators to this study in different departments of the University of Oslo and other institutions, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. So it's nice to see the effort of a team of people involved in these which are big. I mean, it was time-demanding work. So thank you. Yeah, I look forward to share it with the others.
So thank you, Giulia, and also thank you, Srikant, and thank you all the other participants of the selection committee. I know because I have discussed that with Srikant that we should give more space of the junior researchers, and I'll try to follow this advice, Srikant, also in the next edition of Caring Discourse. So always thank you for your advices. Thanks again to the keynote speakers, so also to Paul Gulbrandsen, and to the speakers, and to you, to the students and junior researchers that participated with their talk and poster presentation, and thanks for today's discussion. I'd like to make a special mention to Vito for his help in organizing this conference. So thank you, Vito, for your help. Most of all, thanks to you who have actively participated or even just listened from your homes. Thanks for your time and interest. As you know, the last session of the Caring Discourse conference will be in Portuguese. And we'll start, sorry, I'm muting you, it will start at 5 p.m. Então, so I'm going to switch language. So, então, iremos ter uma mesa redonda para discutir de redes sociais, saúde, oportunidades e desafios. Não percam a possibilidade de vir discutir conosco. So, I should say até logo, and yeah, thank you to you all. See you next year with you.